Welcome to the Generation Open podcast with LDR21, a podcast about workplace culture and leadership that leads to transparency and an open organization. In this episode, we are back to continue our interview with Bryan Behrenshausen of Red Hat. We continue to unpack open, talk about the principles, and discuss companies you are familiar with who are already doing it. Here's your host, the founder and CEO of LDR21, Jen Kelchner.
Right.
So one thing that a lot of people ask me about are who are some examples, type of companies and organizations or even industries that we see that are starting to implement open, these cultures of more openness.
Yeah.
How has it changed their business model, or who are some people that we can use as examples?
Sure. So I would encourage your listeners to head over to opensource.com/open.organization. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we publish articles about openness in organizations, and some of those articles are case studies or interviews with people that are doing some really innovative things. One company we've covered a little bit over the last sort of year and a half has been the social media company Buffer. Buffer is an interesting example because they really embrace the open principle of transparency. I mean, they live and breathe transparency in their culture. So one of our ambassadors is fond of calling the open characteristics sort of your set of dials. Mm-hmm. And in different contexts, depending on your business outcomes or your regulatory constraints, you might have those dials set to different levels. You've got to have all 5 characteristics, but maybe your collaboration skill is a little low, but your transparency your dial is turned further up. These exist in different ratios. Well, Buffer takes it and cranks it up to 11 when it comes to transparency. So they not only make public every employee's salary at the company, so everybody knows how much everybody else is making, but they also make public and transparent the entire formula that they use to calculate a new employee's salary. Okay. So before you even interview with Buffer, you can type in a sort of set of variables that correspond with your experience and see how much you would make if you got offered a job. And that's what you would get offered. That's what your salary would be. And you can see a list of everybody from the co-founders all the way down to the last week's new hires and where they're at and what they make. And Buffer, has told us that this has done some really interesting things. And first of all, it's eliminated a lot of stress from the interviewing process because there is less ambiguity about the tough questions about compensation, which are a really stressful part of any job interview. And it's also eliminated gender pay gaps at the company because when everything's transparent, if disparities exist, people have to explain those disparities. And chances are they will correct them rather than try to justify them and explain them. Certain types of rhetoric. So it really has made a difference for that company. So that's an example sort of a company really embracing radical transparency. Another company that I have sort of gotten to know a little bit through my travels and travails in open is actually one I spoke to on the phone. Now I don't know much about their organizational culture, but I thought their mission was pretty interesting. And they're a company called Blueboard. And what they're doing is they're making sort of peer-to-peer feedback systems for organizations that want to become open. I would guess that they sort of eat their own dog food and actually use the systems in their organization as well. But they've devised some neat internal systems that allow for associates and organizations to offer peer-to-peer feedback on daily interactions and daily events or occurrences without direct managerial intervention. So, I can give you, Jen, points if you've helped me on a project or send you good vibes or whatever their unit of currency is, karma or whatever it might be. Managers don't have to approve it or do anything like that. But what it does is it allows for a sort of collaborative and inclusive culture to emerge when people are given the freedom to directly recognize folks that are helping them on projects in ways that might not relate even to their normal, their normal business duties, their normal job duties. So, you helped me on a project and you stayed late to do it because you had all your work to do. And then you helped me because you have a special skill set around statistics that I don't have. I can send you points. And then of course the employees can redeem those points for experiences, right? Anything from, a dinner out with your spouse to, if you have enough points, you could get like a skydiving lesson or something, So and what the founders in an interview that I sat in on, with them, what they said was that they found that this kind of collaborative and sort of transparent and inclusive culture actually had several benefits for the organization. One of them being increased engagement among the employees, so they were much more engaged in their work, but also increased retention. So they were not only more engaged because they could see directly the impact of the work that they were having, right? Hey, so-and-so really benefited from my, from what I did, and I got recognition for it the next day. And as you know, Jen, much more than I do, being an expert on generational literacy, like this is becoming increasingly important with millennials and Gen Z workers who live in an environment of more frequent feedback mechanisms.
Absolutely.
And so this is designed to kind of, cultivate that sensibility in the organization, but not only increased engagement, but also increased retention because or increases retention that the company says because people who can see the work that they're doing and the impact it's making most directly are more likely to stay and keep doing that work because they feel fulfilled by it every day. So Blueboard has. It has some interesting, clients who implement their system and they work to update that system. But they really believe in that sort of culture of peer recognition, mutual accountability, quick feedback, and it was a really interesting conversation.
That's a great case study. I'm gonna have to go read up on them a little bit and find out more because, that's something. The time that I spent at Deloitte with the folks that I worked with, I think that was a significant pain point for the employees as far as what they reported back to me, was because they were at that time, we're still in that structure with, you had a mid-year and a year-end review, and there wasn't peer feedback. Peer feedback tended to be the old standby of, I don't like what they did, so I'm going to go complain to a manager and see if I can get them right. Everybody feels like they're getting into trouble. So, but there was no other mechanism. If somebody was doing something well, there tended to not be a way to say other than, we might have a staff meeting where I can give somebody a kudos and a props, but there was really nothing to that. And then this frustration I noticed culminated with the, way rating systems tend to happen, or the old rating systems. Everybody benefit of the doubt. We're trying to change that, right? But, you're stuck with potentially this bell curve model of, I could have a great year personally, but because I'm stuck with the way ratings have to go, performance ratings, I get stuck, somewhere in the middle. And to have this, what happened is people would give up, right? They feel demotivated. I'm doing the best work I can possibly do at this moment, but yet, I'm still considered average, or I don't really have any other outlet to be connected to how my piece of the puzzle fits into a much larger picture that's really doing great things, but I can't see it past my cubicle.
Absolutely.
So I think, that's so spot on to have that, have real-time feedback is super important, and to have those type of feedback loops, but where there's a reward connected to what you're doing is good.
And this plays directly into the adaptability characteristic that's fundamental to open organizations. So in open organizations, really learning is a continuous and ongoing process, and adaptation and pivots aren't things that happen at once a year at a performance review or a team or company offsite meeting. They are things that go on every single day. And so the most successful open organizations that we've seen who have really embraced the adaptability characteristic are those that have specific mechanisms in place, whether it be a system like what Blueboard sells or other things, to facilitate rapid, quick feedback, to provide safe spaces for failure so people can experiment, try things out, see the results, and if those things fail, that the implications don't, bring down the entire company for the day, but you have the safety to fail and fail well and fail gracefully and learn from your mistakes. And that they embrace feedback loops, both good, both positive and negative, right? Feedback loops that move in both directions. So people in open organizations often, or should feel just as comfortable telling bad news or talking about their failures as they do about telling good news or talking about their successes. And the open organization ambassadors are actually very specific about this in the open organization definition. They say that in order for an organization to be open, feedback must have some kind of concrete and material consequence for the operation of the organization. There has to actually be a possibility that a feedback loop can alter the conditions under which people are working. You can implement feedback versions. I'll go back again to feedback mechanisms. I'll go back again to the suggestion box. That's a mechanism for collecting feedback. But if nothing ever happens, or there's no material effect on the way that I work or how I work or what I work on or why I'm working on it, then it's not really a genuine feedback loop. It has no material effect on my day-to-day work. So open organizations we've seen be most successful are ones that harness those feedback loops and allow them, to affect what's going on in a way that is productive, even if it's a failure. Because failure can be productive if done, the right way, in other words.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one of the neat paradoxes that come to us from, open organizations. It is this sort of the success of failure, because when you failed, you realize you've taken a risk, you've tried something, it didn't work, and you can now check that box and say, okay, we have more knowledge than we did before and can move on into a more productive direction. But for so long, especially in hierarchical organizations that are really predicated on precision and efficiency, any kind of failure or any kind of breakdown is considered an inefficient detraction from everyday work, and so it's to be avoided. Again, not necessarily criticism, but just what sort of sets open organizations and the way they work apart from way traditional organizations might function.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, let's talk on one last point, which would be what sort of trends are we starting to see that are kind of up and coming next with our open communities?
That's a great question. So trends with our open communities. Well, I will say that the data we get from opensource.com, the sort of the metadata that we get, because we're very we try to practice what we preach. And so as an open team ourselves, we try to use the data that we have at our disposal to make decisions about what we publish and when we publish it, why we publish it. But we are seeing, first of all, just a general increase in attention and awareness and interest in this thing called open. So, I think the fact that we now consistently get more than 1 million page views a month on opensource.com is evidence of the fact that more people are aware of this thing and that they are wanting to learn more about it and participate in it. But unfortunately, not all trends are good, I'll say. So one of the things we are seeing is open is very, right now, very trendy, very buzzy, and it has a potential to take on a lot of meanings and connotations. I think our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, just wrote an article for us on opensource.com a few months ago where he said that I think it was 2015, Wired magazine called 2015 the year that open source went nuclear, right? It was all over the place and just exploded onto the scene, and openness was everywhere and in everything. And if you wanted to win, you had to be open. And if, and now we're a community, and now we're, people using the terminology and the lexicon of open to do what they want to do and achieve what they want to achieve. But unfortunately, when a term gets used widely, that those terms tend to, again, attract certain connotations or usages or deployments that may not be the way they were originally intended, or might detract from the true value that we see them able to have in certain contexts. And so we see a lot of, trends toward people using terms like, community, when just personally, I would argue that the thing they're talking about is not a community, right? It's it doesn't discuss shared vision. It doesn't allow for voluntary participation. It doesn't allow for voluntary disbandment. It doesn't allow for certain styles of governance. It doesn't fundamentally rotate around or orbit around a set of shared values or principles. It's not a community. And so I think one trend, unfortunately, we're seeing is that openness is hot and openness is valuable because more and more people understand its power. But there is a trend toward wanting to use the terms and use the vocabulary to continue business as usual, or put a new coat of paint on some old traditional practices that don't change at all, just have new names. And we call that open washing in some of us open community, right? Where we can take this thing and call it open when it really doesn't embody the 5 characteristics of an organization, or there are certain characteristics of this thing that really don't resonate with historically how we've used the term open.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good key point. It's easy for us to pick up on words that we hear without understanding what their connection is or the context that they're related to. And especially in the society that we live in, where we grab hashtags and run with them.
Right.
It's kind of that same mentality is, we're going to grab the hashtag of open without really digging in deeper to the context of it. So
right. And that's why I think, the work that we do at opensource.com and the work that the open organization ambassadors are doing is so important, because there's a sense in which people say that, sites like opensource.com are meant for raising awareness about openness and the characteristics of open. Absolutely. No question about it. But raising awareness today is easy.
Right.
I mean, oversaturation of, attention is a problem. Like getting awareness is not the problem. It's explaining and really helping people understand, doing the work, in other words, of helping people understand the benefits of this thing, what it is, what it isn't, when it works, when it doesn't, making those fine distinctions and parsing, the really important differences between this kind of transparency and that kind of transparency, or transparency coupled with inclusivity or not. That takes real work.
Yeah.
It's not glamorous. It's more academic, I guess, and it is, it's a little more laborious, but it's more valuable. And this, by the way, is the reason, that Red Hat very candidly invests in opensource.com as a storytelling platform. I mean, the website exists not to sell Red Hat products or services. We don't have Red Hat ads on the site apart from a logo that tries to be transparent about, the fact that it's a Red Hat sponsored site. But the thinking is, look, there needs to be a place online where we're talking about what open means, because it can mean a lot of things. And if we're not careful, it can mean some things that actually do more harm than good. Right. So we, that's why opensource.com and by extension our communities exist, to continue having the conversations that propel this exploration of openness and continue to uncover its value for different groups of people.
That's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for now. But Bryan, I am so happy that you joined us for this first episode, and subsequently probably second episode that we've had. And we'd love to have
Okay.
you back and dig in deeper to some of those case studies. And so if you'd be happy to come back, we'd love to have you sometime.
Anytime. Always happy to talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks, Jen.
We'd like to thank Bryan Behrenshausen from Red Hat for joining us on our first 2 episodes of the Generation Open podcast. Thanks for listening to the Generation Open podcast with LDR21. If you would like to find out more about how to improve the health of your organization or would like information on our Rapid Change program, go to our website, LDR21.com. That's LDR21.com.